Race. In this exercise, we're going to use the core skills we've learned about if statements and binary encoding in order to complete the tasks below. So I'm going to get you started and then set you off on doing the rest of it on your own. So if you remember, binary encoding is just taking some sort of category or text and turning it into a number. So when you do more advanced data analysis, you want to be able to include categorical data, but you can't do math with a category. You can't add blue plus female. It doesn't work that way. So you have to take the categories and turn them into numbers, and that's all binary encoding is. So for the first one, we are asked to create an if statement and binary encode whether or not the pay is greater than or equal to x1. So we'll start an if statement. If, and grab the pay, if the pay is greater than or equal to x1, x1's value is up here. Don't grab x1, actually grab the value for x1. Reference that number. If that's true, then we want to put a 1. Otherwise, we want to put a 0. And we know that 45,000 is greater than 28,000, so we're set. Except before we copy this down, if I start to copy it, the next one it's going to check against is x2 rather than x1. So I need to go back up into this formula and make sure that the reference to the value for x1 does not change. So I'm going to set that a row so it doesn't change. And now when I copy it down, and copy it all the way down, there we go, and check one of these. So this is indeed looking at x1 each time. So we're good to go. In this next column, it's asking us to do binary encoding to see if the pay is less than x2. If it's less, then we put a 1. Otherwise, we put a 0. Since that's very similar to this first one, I'm going to let you do that on your own. In this next section, it's asking us, I'm going to scoot over a little so you can see it a bit better. It's asking us to create binary encoding and put a 1 if the pay is less than or equal to x2 and greater than or equal to x1. So now we have and instead of an or. But the thought process is essentially the same. So we're going to start an if statement, and we want to know if, let's go back over here so we can see. In fact, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see all of this at the same time. Oops. Let's start this again. Okay. Should be able to see a bit better now. Alright, so we want to see if the pay is less than or equal to x2. So if the pay is less than or equal to x2, and I know this is my x2, so I'm going to click on it. But this time I want an and, so I want to know if this is true and if something else is true. And if something else is true, we're just going to go right into that. So if the pay is less than this value, the x2 value, and so we're going to go into something else. If the value is true, then check something else. And check to see if the pay is greater than or equal to x1. Right, if that's true, then you put a 1. If it's not, you put a 0. And if the first one was true, it's automatically going to then be a 0. So this whole thing, this entire second if statement, is simply the value if true for the first if statement. So it's nested inside. So if this value is true, then give the answer to this one. If it's not, then put a 0. We'll close the parenthesis to match the end. Press enter, and it gives us 0, which means it is not true. Now again, before you start copying this down, make sure you make the rows absolute for the X1 and 2 references. And you want the pay to go down because you're going to copy this from row to row. I'll let you copy that down and we'll move on to the next one. I'm going to shrink this down a little so we can see, and then we'll move on to the next column. Okay. Alright, the next one is asking if the pay type is equal to the salary or if the pay is greater than X3. Then we want to put a 1. So again, this one's a little bit new, but uses the same basic logic as before. So if, in this case we're looking for two different things. So if, and we're going to use an or statement, if either of these are true. Alright, so if either of these are true, well, what are we looking for? Well, first we're looking to see if the pay type is equal to salary, and that's written over here. Remember, you want to avoid typing anything if you can. So if that is equal to salary, or if the pay is greater than X3, so the actual pay amount is greater than the X3 value. All right? If that logic, if either one of those are true, then we want to put a 1. If neither are true, then we'll put a 0. Alright, so it's just saying if this or this are true, put a 1, otherwise put a 0. Alright, so at least one of those must be true. If they're both true, you still get a 1. Now before you copy this down, you want to make sure that the pay type is the same and that the hourly is the same, so we don't want those to move when we copy the formula down. So let's lock those rows. And then you can copy the formula down. Now similar to this or, we're going to do an and. And this one is obviously going to start with an if statement. If, and this time we're going to, instead of putting an or, we want both of them to be true, so we'll put an and. Alright, so if and. If what statements? The first logical statement is going to be that the pay type is hourly, so let's grab the pay type. And if it is equal to hourly, and remember that's written as a category over here, so make sure you grab it rather than type it. That way if you change the top part later, everything else will update. So if the pay type is hourly and, what's the next logical statement? The rating is above average. So the rating is equal to above average. So that's 3. Then we'll come back over here. If that's true, so if both of those are true, so close your parenthesis, then we want to put a 1, otherwise put a 0. And of course you're going to need to lock the cells that you're referring to before you copy it down. In the very last column, it's asking us to calculate the new pay, and if you read the directions, it says that the new pay should be calculated by multiplying the employee's current pay and 1 plus the appropriate merit raise. So essentially you're getting a percentage raise, and that percentage raise is based on your rating. Sorry, can't see it over here. Okay, so let's start simply. First we have to figure out what the person's rating is. Okay? So let's start an if statement. And this is going to be similar to the fantasy football one where we were looking for quarterbacks and wide receivers and running backs. In this case we're going to be looking for different ratings. So equals if, and if the rating, let's see if I can get this all on one page. Nope, it's not going to show up. I'm going to shrink this a little. Hang on. Sorry. Bear with me. If you need to shrink yours to make it easier to work, feel free. I just have to fit it all on one screen. Alright, that's going to get us pretty close. Almost. Shrink this down some. A little more. Okay, close enough. Alright, let's try that again. So, equals if. And if, you know, it'll work up in the formula bar. If the rating is equal to 1, then the merit raise is 0%. That makes sense? However, if, start another one, the rating is equal to 2, then the merit raise would be 3%. However, there's a third option. So for this one, if the rating is equal to 3, then the value is going to be, the merit raise is going to be 5%. Alright, now we'll close this one and this one. But wait, we haven't given a value if it's false. So we should probably do that. So if this is false and this is false and this is false, then what are we going to put? If it's true, we know what we're putting. But if it's false, we should probably add one more thing. So I'm going to put a comma, and let's put not on list in quotes, because that's what we want it to say if it's not on the list. And then we have to add, well, let's see, we have our purple parentheses, our red, and now we need a black. Alright, so this goes ahead, this statement. All this did was said, hey, if your rating was 1, 2, or 3, then your merit raise is 0, 3, or 5. But it didn't actually calculate the merit raise yet. So if we want to calculate the merit raise, we have to take this whole value, so I'm going to put it all in parentheses, take this whole value and multiply it by the current pay, and then 1 plus the pay. So in order to calculate the new rate, you have to take what you're currently getting and multiply it by 1 point, either 0.03 or 5. So we'll take the current pay and multiply that by 1 plus that whole thing. So we need one more parentheses, and in this case I got 46,869, which, if I can see the side of my, did indeed give me the right answer. Make sure that yours matches your hint. And again, for all of these, we're going to calculate, or we're going to format as accounting with 2 decimal places, so do make sure that you do that. Alright, on to the last step at the bottom. Now in the very bottom section, it's asking us to show the conditional average annual pay based on the data that we have now binary encoded inside each of these columns. So they're all going to be done essentially the same way. We're going to start, and we want to find the average pay if some sort of criteria is met. Alright, so what do we want to find the average of? Well, we want to find the average pay. So we are going to use a function called the average ifs, very similar to the sum ifs. I want to average the numbers if, well, what numbers do we want to average first? Well, I want to average the pays. I want to average those numbers if, in this case, the pay is greater than or equal to 1. So if the numbers in this cell, or this column, are equal to 1. And that gives me my 47,609, which once I adjust will be 610, and that's correct. Now if you want to copy this over to make it easier on yourself, of course all of your columns will be complete when you do this, but in order to copy it over, remember we're copying it to the right now, so it's not the rows that are changing, it's actually the columns. So the pay column we want to stay the same. So now we're going to lock the column letter, and we're only dragging over, we're not dragging down, so we don't need to worry about the rows. And we're going to lock the column letters in the lookup range. Actually, that's a bad idea, because what will happen if we lock the letters in the lookup range, then it will always be looking at this range, and we do actually want it to change from column to column to column. So let's delete those. That would not be correct. Alright, so we just need to lock the ones in the pay range because we're always comparing the pay. We want to average the pay if whatever condition in each of these columns is met. So if it's true, then we want to average the pay. And you can format and then drag this across, and it should automatically update and calculate the average if whatever the cells inside here, whichever cells end up being true. Alright, once you finish formatting, then you are finished with this particular exercise.